My story begins on the scorched slopes above the valleys of Sicily, in a time when hope seemed like a fragile ember, hidden beneath a mound of cold, stifling ash. Hit subscribe and the bell icon to discover amazing historical stories with us every week. I remember well the sight of a shepherd's hut set ablaze in the mountains, flames licking at blackened timbers, wild and hungry, bursting through the thatched roof as if rejoicing in their sudden freedom. There is a terrible ecstasy in fire's roar, a longing unshackled after being penned away for so long in the stone enclosures of kilns and furnaces. Yet fire, for all its power, is cunning too. Perhaps it is merely doing what it must, for in this world, what are we to do when cleverness and deceit have made us slaves to others' will? Once, a careless hand let a single coal drop beneath the hearth. It nested quietly under the ash, unseen, until it worked its way through the planks and at last set the entire house ablaze. That is how everything began in Enna. Though our fire would spread far beyond a single shepherd's dwelling, the blaze consumed not only huts, not only villages, but the whole colossal island of Sicily. It would last not an hour, not a day or a year, but 6 years in all. I can still see the sparks leaping across the sea, casting their light in Greece, in Spain, and even Rome itself. At that time, I was a slave in the house of Antigenes, teaching his children to read. As a tutor, my fate was gentler than most. My master, Antigenes, though hardly a saint, had a measure of restraint rare among those who held power over others. I had my own little room, and during the day I could leave the courtyard. Being close to the children shielded me from the most humiliating punishments. But, of course, punishments still happen. Antigene, to his credit, used them sparingly, preferring to banish guilty slaves to the mill rather than subject them to beatings. He wanted to be seen as a man of culture. His home bristled with the busts of poets and philosophers. Yet the only things he read were account books and receipts. Word spread that someone in Syracuse had acquired a slave magician, a conjurer. Not to be outdone, Antigenes decided he, too, must possess such a wonder. So entered Eunus, a Syrian in his 30s, possessing a long, narrow face, a high forehead, and thick brows. But most remarkable were his eyes, which seemed to hide some magnetic secret. Slaves, unlike our masters, are eager to share their stories, seeking strength in memories of home. Usually in a week, everything about a new slave becomes common knowledge. His birthplace, his parents, the path that led him into bondage. But Eunus remained a mystery to us. Maybe secrecy was required by his trade, or perhaps it protected something deeper. A day before the performance that would set everything in motion, the entire household was thrown into unrest. Everywhere, things were being scrubbed and polished. Even we slaves were ordered to wear fresh clothes. It was almost as if Antigenes wanted to impress, not only with his conjurer's skills, but also to show his guests the good, cheerful life led by those under his roof. I suspect this charade was in part to infuriate Damophilos, the neighbor and longtime rival of Antigenes. If one found a way to stand out, the other would immediately seek to outdo him. In the hippodrome at Syracuse, their horses raced for supremacy. One would attempt to surpass the other in household splendor or generosity to the community. Yet Antigenes himself was always more restrained. He never paraded through Enna in a chariot pulled by slaves. His shepherds did not rob travelers, as he made sure they were clothed even if poorly. Damophilos, on the other hand, denied his shepherds even rags, forcing them into banditry just to survive. For all their rivalry, the two men, as neighbors, still entertained each other in their homes. I will not bore you with the details of the feast, or how the guests assembled and speeches were made. Let me leap instead to the moment Eunus took up his place. For it was on that day he astounded us all. He wore a long purple tunic, belted with an ornate sash. Silver buckles gleamed on his sandals. Bowing low, Eunus conducted himself with a reverence that masked an underlying audacity. Plates clung to his fingers. Cups of wine refused to spill a conjurer's show, but performed with a gravity that reminded us of priests or mystics from the East. At one point, by his silent signal, Antigenes' own chair was carried before him. Climbing onto it, Eunus sat as though he were a king. He fixed his piercing gaze on one guest, who squirmed uncomfortably before freezing as if meeting the eyes of Medusa herself. Eunus's hand flicked. The guest bolted upright, took an apple from the table, and presented it with ceremony. Another guest, similarly enchanted, handed over a goblet. Among us slaves, a hush fell. Eunus was playing a dangerous game. He treated noble guests like his own servants. At last, it was Antigenes himself. "Come to me, my slave," Eunus commanded. The room fell silent. You could hear a fly settle. Antigenes turned pale, hovering on the brink of an angry outburst, yet he did not break Eunus's gaze. His features slackened, his posture bent, and he answered with a strange humility. "I trust you, Eunus. You will become a king. Just remember those who did you kindness in your time of need." Thus, Eunus gained a strange and unfathomable power over Antigenes. The Syrian did not abuse this power. Yet Antigenes never again spoke of the humiliation. It did not take long for word of Eunus's gifts to spread beyond the household. Soon there was not a single slave in Enna, nor in the surrounding lands, who had not heard of the Syrian and dreamed of meeting him. Yet it wasn't just the magic tricks that drew us to Eunus. There was something deeper in him, a presence, a sense of carrying secrets from far-off lands. I found myself longing to understand him better, to know what fire burned behind his distant stare. He was not like other conjurers, those who merely entertained the idle whims of their masters. No, in him was the air of an Eastern priest, a magus whose wisdom was as sharp as a blade in the night. It was said that the greatest philosophers counted themselves as students of such men. Perhaps it was no wonder, then, that I was drawn toward him. He, too, seemed to welcome my company. Though in small, cautious steps, I began to perform little errands for him, tasks whose meaning only became clear to me later. Once, he handed me slips of papyrus, covered in strange script to give to other slaves, mostly Syrians who belonged to Damophilos, the rival to my master. Another time, he asked me to hide a leather pouch in my room, a pouch that rattled with the telltale sound of coins. One afternoon, he requested a handful of nuts. When I asked him if he liked them, Eunus replied with a wry smile, "Not really," especially since I broke my teeth on them some time ago. But I need them for our work." His words had a weight they did not carry before. By then, I realized that work no longer meant his magic shows. On another quiet evening, Eunus came into my room unannounced. He took me by the shoulders, his grip earnest, and said, "See this nut?" He opened his hand to reveal a walnut that looked no different from any of the others I'd brought him. It's hollow inside, a trick from my father, who died fighting the Romans. It holds not a kernel, but a coal. A simple ruse, but one that will serve a great purpose. I stared at him, confusion coloring my features. "What do you mean, Eunus? I don't understand." "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I am speaking in riddles. It has been hard to remain silent for so long. But tonight, everything will be decided tonight by the wolf's cave. Come, Acheus, at midnight." That night, under a moonlit sky, I made my way toward the wolf's cave, my heart thrumming with a mixture of fear and anticipation. There I found hundreds gathered, men and women, most of them slaves like myself. Among them were the Syrians to whom I had delivered Eunus's messages, now armed with whatever weapons they could muster. I suspected the money in that leather pouch had paid for those arms. Eunus's arrival was as theatrical as anything I'd seen from him. First his hands, then his head. His body seemed to emerge from the shadowy cave mouth, so apparition-like that it almost appeared supernatural. When he moved, his gestures were slow and solemn, his eyes fixed on a point only he could see, his lips barely moving, in whispers to some unseen presence. Finally, he stood and raised his arms to the sky. "Mother Earth," he called, in a voice deep and trembling with significance. "Greatest of goddesses, hear me, answer us." Though his mouth appeared closed, the words rang through the clearing, sending chills along my arms. Someone in the back gasped in awe. Then, as if pulled from the very guts of the earth, fire burst from Eunus's mouth, illuminating his wild, entranced face. The crowd collectively gasped and fell to their knees. They saw not a trick, but a sign, Mother Earth's own fire, answering their suffering from beneath the soil of Sicily. Only I knew the truth. Cloaked in the walnut shell was not a miracle, but a coal. A tiny deception, wielded not for amusement, but for a greater good. With cries of freedom and torches held high, we rushed down the mountainside toward Enna. Those holding weapons moved with the determination of soldiers, not slaves. In each face, there was a spark of Eunus's fire, hope rekindled, purpose awakened. The events that followed are carved into history. Enna was consumed by flames, and Damophilos, along with those who trampled the dignity of man, perished. Eunus was proclaimed king now, Antiochus by name. And me? I became his general, commander of the army of freed slaves. All this from a single ember, the small, hidden coal placed by Eunus within the hollow shell of a walnut. And so the fire spread, not just across Sicily, but far, far beyond. The wind off Mount Etna sometimes carried an acrid tang smoke, probably from distant fields or furnaces. But after that night at the Wolf's Cave, it seemed like all of Sicily had caught fire. In Enna, life transformed overnight. Those called slaves a day before strode the streets as free men now, torches aloft, their voices echoing with new authority. I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Freedom was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. For days I barely slept, my mind whirling with memories of my old life and fear for what the future might hold. No one, it seemed, was untouched by the changes sweeping over us. Children cried out in wonder. Elders wept openly. And everywhere, people argued about what was to come. Eunus, now King Antiochus, moved among us with purpose. Some worshipped him as touched by the gods, others eyed him with suspicion. For me, the truth lay somewhere in between. His vision for our new world was bold. Those who had once worn chains would command armies, set laws, own land. He trusted me with responsibilities I could hardly have imagined before, the stores of grain to count, dwellings to assign. But also, the armies needed leaders. The old order is not toppled by hope alone. Day after day, emissaries arrived from countryside estates, from distant hills, each bringing rumors of Roman retaliation. I strove to train the swelling ranks, drilling farmers and laborers in the art of war. Sometimes I was lost in memories of teaching children their letters and struggled to recognize myself in the general's cloak. History offers few moments like these, moments when the world creaks and spins and will never right itself again. Messengers bore news of rebellions spread beyond our hills. Small bands of freed slaves were reported burning villas as far as Agrigentum, rallying others to our cause. The spirit of revolt seemed unstoppable, though whispers grew louder about the ferocity with which Rome would answer. Though the nights passed in uncertainty, each dawn brought me clarity as I watched the city stir. There was hardship, and inevitably, some among us clung to old hatreds or found opportunities for revenge. Justice was sometimes crude, and mercy rare. I wondered whether we could build a better world, or if suffering had only bred new chains. Eunus spoke often to the people, his words persuasive, filled with tales from distant Syria and prophecies of Sicilian freedom. One day, I visited the charred ruins of Damophilos's estate. Silent, except for the wind, I could not rejoice at his fate, though he had wronged many. Destruction, even in the name of justice, left a bitter taste. Our city buzzed with debates about laws, property, vengeance, forgiveness. Through it all, I found myself returning to the simple tasks, tending wounds after battles, listening to frightened children, coaxing green shoots from the trampled gardens. These moments anchored me, saving me from the swirl of ambition and fear. Yet above all, it was the fire that had begun our journey, a tiny ember, a flicker of rebellion now blazing so high its glow could be seen from the highest walls of Rome itself. We had made history, but I was beginning to realize how frail even the greatest flames become, surrounded by gathering storms. Number, what do you think about this historical event? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The weeks passed in a haze of upheaval. New laws had to be forged from chaos, and former slaves tested the weight of their independence. The city became a crucible, where every day was an experiment in freedom. I learned the complexity of justice, how easy it is to err, how hard it is to forgive. Some called for vengeance against our old oppressors, but others argued that cruelty would stain our hard-won liberty. I remember mediating quarrels over torn land and broken property. What had been Damophilos's and Antigene's now fell under the rule of us all. Sometimes Eunus retreated into long silences, pondering the fate of our rebellion. He refused to become a tyrant, and debated with me well into the night whether kingship was a blessing or a curse. Stories from distant lands weighed on him. He spoke of other uprisings, other magic tricks that shaped destiny, a burning city in Greece, riots in Spain, even the distant thunder of Rome, which now gathered its legions to crush our flame. Our armies grew under my command, but so did our fears. Some, hardened by slavery, believed only violence would preserve us. Others hoped that justice could be served without bloodshed. I did my best to temper excess, but my own heart was often divided. Childhood memories, teaching in Antigone's gentle home, clashed with the grim realities of war. One dawn, messengers brought grave news. Roman envoys had landed on the island. I met them outside Enna, wary but resolute. They offered terms, but our people refused to bow again. Eunus addressed the crowds, his voice weary but filled with fire. Rome's army approached, intent on extinguishing the rebellion. As general, my duty was clear: defend our freedom or perish. Battles followed, brutal and uncertain. The legions of Rome tested our strategies and our courage. I pored over old scrolls capturing warfare, the siege of Syracuse, cunning Greek stratagems, stories of heroes who faced impossible odds. I tried to mold my people, still raw from chains, into something resembling an army. Amid the conflict, I chronicled our hardships. Hunger pangs gnawed at us, and the city's wells threatened to run dry. I watched as women, once resigned to their fate, joined the fighters with fierce determination. Sometimes, in the deep stillness before dawn, I felt the enormity of what we faced. A world built on suffering, now trembling on the brink. Eunus, despite his kingly title, remained humble. He relied on the counsel of the people. In his eyes was a sadness, an understanding that even if the rebellion fell, its embers would live on in memory, a testament to how one hidden coal, buried in a walnut shell, changed the fate of thousands. In the shadow of Enna's walls, I bore witness to the forging of a new kind of community. One built atop dreams and ashes. Each day brought more challenges. Our people struggled with scarcity, fear, and the ghosts of old wounds. The markets reopened with trembling hands. Neighbors sought reconciliation, and former slaves debated fiercely over what justice should look like. I sat among the elders, hearing their grievances and weighing ancient wrongs against the fragile hopes of tomorrow. Rumors spiraled, stories of Roman ships gathering off the coast, tales of betrayals from within. I became vigilant, never sleeping more than a few hours at a time as I led scouts into the countryside. The landscape itself seemed transformed, scarred by fire and the passage of armies. But amid it all, I found beauty, children laughing again, gardens seeded with hope, small acts of kindness blooming like wildflowers amid ruins. Eunus grew more withdrawn, often walking alone beneath the olive trees. I would join him when he permitted it, and we would speak quietly about philosophy, about home, about the nature of power and mercy. He confessed his doubts, his sorrow for the suffering even our victory had cost. At his side, I grappled with my own burdens, haunted by memories of lost comrades, and the knowledge that every general, every king, eventually stands alone before the consequences of his choices. We built new rituals to bind our people, days of remembrance for the slain, oaths sworn by torchlight, feasts shared in the name of freedom. Historians would later judge us harshly, I am sure, for the errors inevitable in such a bruising struggle. Yet I saw in every face the longing to belong, the wish to forgive and be redeemed by the world we had made together. I worked diligently to ensure fair distribution of food and shelter, and at times I was forced to act with severity to prevent chaos against the relentless tide of Rome. Our spirit endured. Skirmishes at the city edges went on for weeks. Battles fought with passion but rarely with victory. It was said the Roman legions were invincible, and each day their shadow grew longer. But it was our resilience that defined us, even as supplies dwindled and unity strained. In those moments, as hope faltered and dissent crept in, Eunus reminded us, embers never die if tended with care. Our story will burn on in the hearts of those who come after. The fires that set our island alight had become more than rebellion. They had become symbols. No matter what lay ahead, I knew we had kindled something enduring from the smallest spark. Winter pressed upon us with a severity that seemed to echo the hardening hearts of our enemies. Food became scarce, and hunger stalked even the bravest among us. Each morning, I surveyed the city walls, watching for the signal fires atop distant hills, a code we had devised to warn of approaching Romans. I trained new recruits, many no older than children, and tried to instill in them the discipline that could turn the tide of battle. Yet despair sometimes curled around the edges of my thoughts as surely as the smoke from our dwindling hearths. In council, tempers flared and alliances shifted. Some advocated for negotiating with Rome, desperate for peace at any price. Others, consumed by pain, urged us to fight to the bitter end. Eunus struggled beneath the weight of his crown, trying to inspire hope, but the lines on his face told a story of doubt and fatigue. I stood at his side, torn between loyalty and reason, clinging to memories of why we had begun this fight. As the siege tightened, acts of courage and kindness became more precious than gold. I remember a mother sharing her last loaf of bread with a neighbor's child, and a wounded soldier, hardly more than a boy, smiling to reassure those around him. In the darkness, we shared stories, weaving a tapestry of hope from dreams and longings half remembered. A small band, lured by promises of clemency, attempted to open the gates for the Romans. The conspirators failed, but trust was shaken to its core. I found myself questioning the limits of mercy and the price of justice, whether the warmth of revolution can survive when suspicion seeps into every bond. As starvation set in, some whispered that we should surrender. I could not judge them. Fear is a cunning adversary. Yet through weariness and doubt, I remained steadfast. Even when hope is but a lingering ember, it can ignite again if given the breath of courage. Darkness and hunger gnawed at our defenses, but in the silence, I discovered an unexpected clarity. Amid the despair, I learned to recognize bravery, not as an absence of fear, but as a refusal to succumb. Our city became quieter, its streets swept by winds that brought not only icy cold but anxious rumors. I moved through the quarters at night, my cloak drawn tight, visiting the sick, the grieving, those who clung to shreds of faith in a cause that now seemed lost. From Rome came chilling tales of what awaited defeated rebels. Friends pleaded with me to save myself, to flee, surrender, or betray Eunus for clemency, but I could not abandon him, nor the people who had placed their trembling faith in our vision. Each day, I gathered our fighters, reading to them from histories of past revolts, of Spartacus and legendary warriors. I urged them to see our actions not only as a struggle for survival, but as part of something larger, a longing for justice that spanned centuries. Snow fell in drifts along the walls, softening the scars of war. Though we were fewer now, our resolve burned brightest against the growing cold. Eunus called a final council, inviting even the lowest servant to speak. We prayed for wisdom and gathered supplies for a last stand. In the quiet, as dawn bled across the horizon, I realized this rebellion was more than a fight for freedom. For many, it was the first time they had ever chosen for themselves, when every decision, whether wise or doomed, belonged to them and not to a master. This, I whispered, is what it means to be human, even if only for a season. We had lived as men and women, not as chattel. The siege lines closed in. On the morning when the enemy banners finally rose above the city, I stood at the gates beside Eunus. We clasped hands wordlessly, knowing that even in defeat, embers would carry our story forward, borne by wind, by rumor, by the memory of a tiny coal hidden in a walnut shell. If you enjoyed learning about this piece of history, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe for more fascinating stories, and let me know in the comments which historical period you'd like to explore next. The battle for Enna ended in ruin. I watched brave men and women fall around me, their bodies illuminated by the fires we had once kindled in hope. Rome did not show mercy. The victors made examples of our leaders, and I found myself shackled once more, a prisoner among the ruins of freedom. Eunus, my friend and king, was led away under heavy guard. I glimpsed him only once, his face streaked with sorrow, yet his eyes still burned with the memory of all we had built together. In the silent, rubble-filled cells, where they placed us, I turned inward, remembering every moment of courage, betrayal, laughter, grief. Even in chains, I resolved to record our story, to carve it in memory, so it would live longer than the walls of Enna or the rule of Rome. Each night, as guards paced beyond the torches, I whispered our tale to new arrivals. In time, the myth grew, shaping itself into hope for the oppressed, a warning to tyrants, a reminder that even the smallest ember can set the world alight if tended by brave souls. Eventually, I was sold once more, this time to a household far from Sicily. I taught new children as I had once taught the sons of Antigenes, always searching for embers in their eyes, waiting for the moment when a story, hidden like a coal in the hollow of a walnut, might spark a new fire. Years passed, and the pain of loss faded into legend. Rebels inspired by our struggles rose and fell, and scholars pieced together the fragments of our rebellion. If you learn anything from my story, let it be this: freedom is born not just from violence or anger, but from the quiet courage to believe a better world is possible. One prison, one ruler, one defeat cannot extinguish the embers left by those who dared to rise. The fire of liberty burns quietly and eternally in the hearts of all who remember. And so, I close my tale. May it land in the hands of those who are shackled and spark hope that never dies until the next ember ignites.